The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to rise in this House and speak about an important issue of immigration law and procedure and policy in this country. And before I do, I want to point out the fantastic work being done by my colleague from Surrey, British Columbia, the honourable member from Newton North Delta, doing an outstanding job in showing Canadians a different way, a better way of making immigration policy in Canada, one that actually streamlines our system, makes our immigration system more effective and efficient, but retains the kind of compassion and respect for law and procedure that I think all Canadians cherish and have learned to recognize as a hallmark of our system. You know, it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, the government, of course, controls the House agenda, particularly a majority government that the Conservatives currently enjoy. Focus on the word currently. And they get to choose to bring forward whatever legislation they want. I had the privilege of being our party's immigration critic for a year and represent the riding of Vancouver Kingsway, where the number of new Canadians are riding is among the highest in the country. In fact, well over 70% of the people in our riding represent first, second, or third generation Canadians. And my office deals with thousands of immigration cases every year. So I have, I think, a representative sample of what the major issues and problems are in the immigration system. And so it strikes me as very interesting and fundamentally disappointing that of all the issues in the immigration system that the government could be dealing with right now, they've chosen to focus on the deportation of certain permanent residents. And I'll be getting to what I think should be more important and pressing priorities in a moment. So what's in this bill, C-43? Mr. Speaker, basically this bill focuses on an important but relatively narrow issue of the procedures to be invoked in deporting people who may have committed crimes in this country or otherwise misrepresented themselves. Now, the NDP recognizes and supports the need for an effective and responsive judicial apparatus for removing serious criminals who are not citizens. All citizens, I think, in this country would agree with that statement. We understand the need to be monitoring and modernizing our very slow, on occasion, systems, and we support efforts to do so. But what this bill does is a mixture of good and I think very concerning and troubling things. It concentrates more power in the hands of the minister himself by giving him new discretionary authority over the admissibility of temporary residents. It relieves the minister of the responsibility to examine humanitarian circumstances in certain cases. It gives the minister a new discretionary authority to provide an exception to the family member of a foreign national that is declared inadmissible. It changes what constitutes the definition of serious criminality for the purpose of access to an appeal of a determination of inadmissibility. It increases the penalty for misrepresentation, and it clarifies that entering the country with the assistance of organized criminal activity does not on its own lead to inadmissibility. So I think you can see there's a mixture of some positive steps but also some very regressive and negative aspects of this bill. It's a common feature of this government, and in particular the current Minister of Immigration, who seems to constantly want to concentrate discretionary power in the sole single hands of the minister. It seems to be a feature of this government that they want to continue to try to tighten and reduce and restrict the ability of there to be judicial oversight or appeal access to decisions that are often made by single people who are not accountable and are often political appointees. These are very troubling components of this government's approach to the legal system. It's not limited to immigration. I think we see this in their general approach to crime in general. Where the NDP parts ways with the Conservatives is that we believe that we can build and improve our immigration system without trampling on people's rights, without concentrating dangerous discretion and power in the sole hands of the Minister of Immigration, while preserving mechanisms that ensure effective reviews by courts and democratically elected representatives in Parliament, that builds up sufficient flexibility to ensure that due consideration is always given to unique circumstances of every case. And I think Canadians are rightly proud of our fair and compassionate system, and they oppose this government's move towards a cold, mean-spirited, ideological, inflexible, and extreme position on immigration. We've seen serious questions of constitutionality raised in this government's agenda, where we know that the Justice Department gives information advice to the ministers of this government that they're likely pursuing ideologically based legislation that is unconstitutional, and this government says they don't care. There's been 3 cases recently in the last 4 months where courts have struck down as unconstitutional violations of Canadians' charter rights in their ideological blind zeal to pass legislation that makes them look tough, but is not backed up by evidence or respect for courts or a constitution of this land. An example of this government's mean-spirited attitude, and I think one of the reasons that this bill is put before us today, is to change the channel on Canadians' abhorrence and widespread opposition to this government's taking away of health care rights to refugee claimants in this country. And, you know, you can, whenever this government gets in trouble, and it gets in trouble quite often, they try to put forward some tough-on-crime aspect and try to switch Canadians' attention to relatively, to important but relatively minor issues in the grand scheme of things. Now, here are the real problems in the immigration system. The real problems that this government should be putting legislation before this House to deal with are these. There are huge waiting lists for every single type of immigration application there is. Across the board, no exceptions. The fastest immigration application possible is generally when you sponsor a spouse. When a Canadian marries someone who's not a Canadian citizen or permanent resident and wants to, quite rightfully wants to have their spouse with them. That is taking 1 to 2 years. The current waiting list to sponsor your parents was 10 to 13 years. And this government was so inept and incompetent in dealing with that issue that the only way they could handle it was to impose an absolute freeze, a 2-year freeze on any applications by any Canadian or permanent resident to sponsor their parents, period, which is currently in force. The employers of this country that want to bring skilled workers over routinely complain that it takes 6 months, 12 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Most of the time, it takes so long to get a skilled worker over here to satisfy their business needs that by the time they actually get the application approved, it's too late. The question of granting visitor visas is so important. The system is absolutely fundamentally broken with visitor visas in this country. The system is unjust, it's arbitrary, there is no right of appeal. In my neck of the woods, where I have an extensive South Asian population, the refusal rate of visitor visas applying through one of the 2 visa offices in India, the one in Chandigarh, is 53%. More than half of every application through Chandigarh is rejected through that office. Now, what are these applications for? Mr. Speaker, these are for people who want to come to Canada to attend weddings of their family members, births, anniversaries, graduations, visits, so brothers and sisters can reunite who haven't seen each other for decades. The very important events that Canadians cherish and want to share with their family. This government sits idly by while tens of thousands of visa applications are rejected every single year for no reason whatsoever. And every member in this House, from all sides, knows that people come into their office and say, we don't understand why the visa application has been rejected by some faraway anonymous person working in a consulate with no appeal, no way to access them. Mr. Speaker, these are the kinds of issues that this government should be tackling with the current immigration system. These are the broad, general, widespread issues and problems that Canadians face on a day-to-day basis. And I would call on this government and this minister to quit playing politics with the immigration system and trying to look like he's tough on crime and actually solve the actual real problems of the immigration system and produce a modern immigration system that can quickly, efficiently, and fairly process every application. There's no reason that any application across the board shouldn't be processed from start to finish within 24 months, that we shouldn't have a fully computerized system in this country where Canadians shouldn't have accountability from the bureaucrats making decisions. And that's the kind of legislation that this side of the House will support and we call on the government to table in this House to make our immigration system modern, helpful, and that is so important to Canadians' futures and the economy of our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.